Welcome to the IC Connected or ICON podcast. This podcast will challenge conventional thinking about internal communications. It will force you to think differently, consider bold ideas, and step outside your comfort zone through real, unscripted insights from some of the best internal comms pros and subject matter experts in the world. But most importantly, this podcast will help you elevate your career, and together we'll elevate the internal comms profession to the C-suite.
Greetings, this is Mike Klein from Reykjavik, Iceland, and I would like to welcome you to the ICON podcast with Erik Meyers. Erik is a We Lead Comms honoree, and Erik has been a standout communicator and communication leader for a number of years. The ICON podcast is sponsored by Sparrow Connected, the internal communication platform that is accelerating business performance and elevating the world's communication leaders through the We Lead Comms program. Erik, you have been living and working mainly in the German-speaking world for the last 25 years. And I would like you to introduce yourself and maybe say a little bit about, what it's been like working in a very different culture from which you were raised in.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for the introduction. Thanks also for the opportunity to talk about communications leadership, which I think I could talk about for hours or days or weeks, also with you probably. I'm originally from Connecticut, so New England in the US. I spent quite a bit of time in school, also my senior year in high school as an exchange student, studied German and biology, and I always wanted to gain work experience in Germany, which I guess I loved being in. I love languages anyway, and I had the opportunity to join SAP in 1998 at the headquarters, starting first in a development department as a technical writer and translator, and had many different roles at SAP throughout the years I was there. And moved into communications fairly early, which was around customer communications. But I was speechwriter for several CEOs there, several board members. I did internal communications. A huge piece was digital, of course. And I also worked for one of the board members on strategy projects, but also communications. I guess back to when I originally came to Germany, I never really had a plan to say, okay, I'm going to Germany for 5 years, but I really wanted to gain this work experience. And I just loved, still here too, love living in Europe. My next role after that was working at BASF, also at the headquarters. I was hired as sort of the first digital communications leader to pull together digital communications topics. Quickly also was responsible for global employee communications, photo, film, and part of the European communications. At the end of my time there, I was responsible for marketing communications for one of the divisions. And I decided to then go to Hilti, the construction leader in Liechtenstein. I became head of corporate communications, which also was a strong piece around digital. We launched, or internal as well, we launched a digital workplace for all 30,000 employees. It was a very tight project. After that, I was a digital and communications consultant. And since January this year, so 2022, I'm the communications head at L&R, which is a privately owned company in the medical product space. One thing that has definitely given me a lot of I would say potential opportunities was really being bilingual, but also being experienced in working in different cultures. Many of the companies or jobs that I had, either within a company moving or between companies, was really because of these skills, which I built over the years, learning also some German dialects, although I don't speak them that well. I guess that, and I've just loved living here and working here. There's big differences like health insurance, many more vacation days, which we have. In Germany, it's around 30. Now I'm in Vienna since September. It's about 25, but that's still a lot compared to the US. I love using both languages or language in general. And I guess in a communications role in a German-speaking country or any country that's wherever you are, you need to understand the language, particularly if you're dealing with employees there or also external partners.
Well, I mean, there's a lot in what you're saying that I think is really interesting and that we can explore. But I think a common thread of what you've discussed is not just that you're working in different cultures, you're working between and across cultures and not just national culture. I mean, you work obviously between, the Anglo-American and the Germanic cultures, but you also work across, and your academic background reflects this, the scientific world and the communications world, the kind of expansive world of big ideas, working externally with the more focused world of working internally. And are there any common lessons that you have for other communication folks who find themselves between different cultures and different value systems as much as anything else?
That's a very good point. I think most of my roles have been global. So really the headquarters are in German-speaking countries, but we have, as we do now, colleagues in every country or many countries, customers in many, many countries. I think one thing is really, and I tell this to people that are thinking of moving abroad, say from the US mainly, or traveling, you have to immediately expect that wherever you are will not be like where you're from and things. And yeah, I know you, I mean, you're the same, but, or you understand this. What you think maybe say, quote unquote, normal, or good or a right way of doing things may actually be the exact opposite in the country that you're going to, and vice versa. And I think you really have to be open for these differences, and not try to do something like you think it should be done. I think there's a cliche, which unfortunately I have seen a lot of, that American companies particularly have a certain way of doing things, try to export to the rest of the world, and it usually fails. Or most people in many countries are already assuming, oh God, the Americans are coming. They're going to tell us what to do and act like they know everything. And this just doesn't work. And I mean, there are so many examples also of products that have been launched in other countries with the name meant something strange because, a really cliche American looked for, we'll just call it the same thing and launch it. Or people are shocked when they go to another country that it's not like the US. But in general, wherever you are, if you're moving to another country or working, and I would say this is one thing that I highly recommend for anybody that I'm either hiring or mentoring, you really need international experience, no matter what company you are, even in the US. It really, really helps you open your eyes to different things in the world, gives you different perspective. And many companies are global. Ours isn't that big, but it's also global. You really need to understand these different aspects and just try to find common ground to communicate, say, a strategy or a topic. And you always have to keep in the back of your mind that everybody's different. There will be different reactions. And you may also, or you should tailor your communications to the different countries, also building a network within these countries, because obviously they know the language, but they also know the people better.
You mentioned that your current company is quite a bit smaller than some of the other companies that you've worked with. One of the things that I've looked at over the years, particularly working outside the U.S., I've lived and worked in about 6 different countries in addition to the U.S., is the difference between the strategy dynamics in a large company versus a small company. I would imagine that if you're a multinational, whether you have 1,000 people or 100,000 people, certain rules apply regardless of size. And there's a bigger question about when do you need a dedicated internal comms resource function, whatever you want to call it. Is there a magic number? Is there a magic process? Is there a magic strategy? Or do you see certain common principles at least?
That's a very good question. I think in general, every company needs some communications resource. I think even one of my first places I worked had 50 employees, a small automotive publisher near Boston in the US. But there was communications need there for communicating to customers, et cetera. Obviously, the internal piece there was a lot easier. I mean, the owner manager walked around and could talk to everybody. I think you definitely need somebody focused, at least in part, on internal communications, because no matter the size, even a smaller company, there's still going to be people who don't know what's going on, people who don't understand where the company's going. Or, of course, then there's the gossip rumor mill, which you want to try to, you really want to explain and be open about what's going on. And I think that applies no matter what size the company is. Obviously, the larger the company is, the more challenged this is. Huge companies, the biggest challenge is often, top-down never really works. The board implements a strategy, and then, after the maybe one or maximum 2 layers after that, nobody knows what's going on. And I think the other aspect of communications, particularly internal communications, to keep people informed, which is the number one thing, motivated, and also trying to connect people, is it takes regular work. So you need somebody who's regularly sort of greasing the wheel, trying to inform people and really pull the information that they're getting from throughout the organization and provide it to others, and also helping facilitate conversations, particularly between leadership and employees, which often is missing.
It's interesting to hear you say that. You're talking about dialogue within the organization, particularly being missing. That the company strategy usually doesn't penetrate more than a layer or two below before people just consider that what they're doing is what they're doing, and that's pretty much it. What I also heard you saying was that, internal comms is foundational in a lot of ways. And, having been, you're a communication director, but you have in a lot of ways an internal comms consciousness, and indeed an internal comms heart in a lot of ways. What can you say about the topic, or what people say around, internal and external comms are merging? What is your thought about that? And what do you, how do you say that? How do you think that's going to end up working in the end, if it's going to happen at all?
I think in general, whatever the size of the company, your communications teams, internal, external, whatever, need to be working closely together. The worst situations I've seen where, there's several social media channels, for example, and marketing's doing one, and communications, and the message going out is completely different or conflicting. I think there's the stakeholder management, or the target groups that you want to reach, which you have to coordinate. But I still think there's a need for separate internal and external. I think particularly, people say, if it's communicated internally, it'll probably go outside. That's not necessarily true. And I think there's often, I would say sadly so, often a much bigger focus on customer and journalists and external, when actually you really want to make sure first that your employees know what's going on, that they're informed, they're motivated, and they understand how what they're doing connects to the company strategy and direction. Because if you don't have that, you're not going to be selling product. You won't have happy customers. And when something goes wrong internally, or there's challenges or a crisis, and the employees have no idea what's going on or start even rebelling, then unfortunately, that's often when senior leaders in the company realize that that's so important. But you need to be doing that all the time, being open with your employees if there's a merger or acquisition, and not trying to make it sound like it's so great, when it may be good. But there's often negative pieces, which, from my personal experience, which I've tried to counteract. They want to make it, the senior leaders want to make it sound so great, and employees immediately smell the reality. I think companies need to really shift much more and invest in internal comms. And I think if you're starting out in your communications career, a lot of people are, say, pulled to maybe the quote unquote glamorous PR jobs, or say speech writing for CEOs. I've been a CEO speechwriter, so that it can be fun. But there's so much need for internal communications experts because there's such a lack of, often in many companies, really experienced people who can explain topics to employees and really, really focus on the employee, because without that, your company won't be successful.
No, I definitely, I agree with everything you said. I'll be honest with you. I absolutely agree with everything that you said.
That's good to hear.
And I like the fact that, you are so frontal about, you can't be an effective communications director unless you've got a fundamental understanding of internal dynamics and can work with those dynamics effectively. And you mentioned change comms as being a particularly interesting area of that, because that has a dynamic all its own. How do you see change comms as being different from business as usual internal comms? And what can people do so that they can, switch gears and be effective in a change context?
I think with change communications, the first thing is to realize, which is something to explain to senior executives, is that change takes time. I've seen so many programs, for example, implementing a digital workplace, and after, I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating only a bit, 1 or 2 weeks, the CEO is like, why doesn't everybody love this? I think change communications as a field or as a topic is probably one of the most exciting things, because you're helping to affect, for the positive, change within an organization. And you're also bringing a lot of people together. If it's implementing a strategy or explaining a strategy, or trying to change the organization more towards, say, new way of working, you have so many interesting topics that you can work on, and so many people that you will meet. That's one thing I love in communications too. You meet so many people from across the organization, and often you have the same. I guess the more senior roles you have the same pretty much view of the company as a CEO, because you need to understand pretty much everything as she or he does to do your job effectively. But with change communications, it's so important because so many companies, particularly around digital, want to be digital. We're going to be digital. We'll implement a platform, or let's get an app, or I don't know, we'll upgrade SAP. That's not digital, and it's often the piece that's missing is trying to explain to people early on how this could help their job, for example, or what it means for the future. And you have this really key role as a change communicator to make this happen. I guess the flip side is, as I mentioned before, often the expectation is the change happens overnight, which it obviously cannot. So it can be also a frustrating role, because you see even over years how much has changed or how much has not, I guess, is the other side.
I want to feedback kind of what you said about companies want to be digital, because I think that's there's a huge area of extreme expectation, over expectation. That, you said companies want to be digital, but instead they do digital things, and they think that's the same. And the reality is that digital is a way of thinking, it's a way of acting, it's a way of structuring your business and its mindset. And just simply adding bits and pieces of technology, doesn't go anywhere near, kind of the mind shift that's involved. And certainly, you've led several technology implementations within internal comms and within organizations. What are the tangible things that you can do to succeed and avoid this common misstep?
The first thing with digital in general, and whether this is digital communications or digital automation of a production facility or something else, is that it always starts with a corporate strategy. I will never understand companies who, say, oh, we need this new app or this new platform, or they read something and, let's all do, I don't know what, Slack. First you have a corporate strategy, which explains where the company's going, and everything that the company does needs to connect back to that. And digital is not a thing separate, but you have identified in your strategy, say whatever the 5 or 10 goals, could be also financial goals, where the company wants to go. And then you have, how are we going to make this happen? And one thing could be implementing digital tools, such as in production to be more efficient, such as digital workplace, so people can find information more quickly, collaborate more quickly. But you always need to connect what any digital project is back to the goals of the company or the values of the company or the vision and mission of the company. Because one, it helps you explain to a board that is often perhaps a bit skeptical, particularly when it comes to internal communications and digital. And it also helps to explain to employees, to go back to the internal comms example, of why you're doing this. And in general, it's just a strategic way of working, rather than just saying we're going to do this or that. And I think when you start there, that's really, really crucial. I think the other piece is really bringing people together from different areas. So we did, I would say, the highlight of my career was we redesigned, re-implemented the web landscape at BASF. And we had over 1,000 different sites, all historical, also big company. Over the years, different product sites, country sites, global. And we had so many conversations with people, and they said, oh, I want this, I want that. And I brought everybody together with different perspectives in a room, physically in a room, and said, okay, it's one website. These are the goals we need to come up with together. And that really helped because, you could gather 100 requirements, but it's still only one website, which you can't implement. Or to go to the internal comms piece, if you're implementing a digital workplace, also getting as much input from employees as possible. So all kinds of employees, because one, of course, the ivory tower shouldn't be coming up with something for a global company on its own, but you also want to understand how people would use it.
No, that's actually a very interesting segue to another part of the conversation. Really, the idea that technology is an instant solution. Technology, like, for example, you see a practice, in not just internal communication, but in terms of workplace technology in general, where you have certain vendors saying, we've got an ROI calculator that if you buy our solution, you'll increase your employee engagement by X%, and that will increase your profitability by X%. And so we can promise you a 10-to-1 ROI. That never works. And you've got a slogan called Fight the Hype. And how do you put that, bring that to life in an internal comms context, in a corporate context, and in general, in the way you approach life? Because you do a lot of stuff outside of your comms work. That's also interesting, and I think interesting to the listeners out there. Really, fighting the hype. What does that look like inside the firewall, outside the firewall, and outside the workplace?
I think fight the hype, and I've used that for quite some time. There's so much hype particularly in digital, but also in the communications world, where you go on LinkedIn and somebody writes something about some new trend, and pretty much everybody else jumps on and like, oh, we need that. That's so cool, whatever. Because it's like jumping on the bandwagon, but what is the actual value of it? And with digital, or with technology in general, less is more. And you really have to, as I said before, start with a corporate strategy. So just throwing tools at employees because they're cool or they're supposed to help never works, because in my experience, often there's 20 that they're having to deal with. IT keeps also wanting to implement things, and employees have no idea what to use when. And also from an external comms perspective, particularly social media. When I hear or when I see people on particularly LinkedIn or Twitter writing, "Oh, everybody needs to be on TikTok. Your company needs to be on TikTok," I think that is not a strategy. That is not a communication strategy or a smart move. What you do is, starting with a corporate strategy, you have a communication strategy, which then explains your target groups, your channels, your goals, and then you see, okay, which channels do you want to use? Because like I said before, with technology, particularly also with communications, you really need to focus. You don't need to be on everything just because somebody says that you need to. So fight the hype. I could probably do every minute. Every time I'm on LinkedIn, there's something there where I think, why? There isn't really a conversation. It's more about just people patting each other on the back because they're talking about the latest trend. Because it should be what creates value, what makes sense, what connects to the strategy, and also what can be, particularly for internal comms, be digested in general. And type, I often am writing Fight the Hype about technology topics, but there's a lot of other topics or trends where people should take a step back and look at whether it makes sense rather than just jumping on it. And then everybody moves from one to the other, one trend to the other.
I think implicitly, the bigger the bandwagon gets, the less interesting and less strategic the conversation gets. And I wanted to talk in kind of rapid fire fashion with you having your Fight the Hype sobriety hat on about a number of topics, one of which is the whole workplace strategy conversation about remote first, hybrid and office based. And there was, if anything, an overwhelming amount of hype about hybrid working as being the eternal solution to all of this stuff. What would you say with your Fight the Hype hat on? What would you say with your Fight the Hype hat on about the workplace strategy conversation?
Some people now are saying, "Oh, it's all going to be remote," or "We don't need office space," or some people are saying, "Oh, we all should work in the office because we all need to work together." I think it's the same thing for the other topics around which digital to use or which communications to do or how you're implementing digital. It starts with a corporate strategy. What are the goals of the company, and how can this best be done for the company? So in terms of when should people maybe work in the office or maybe from home? And it's really an individual thing because every company is a different culture. I think statements like, "Oh, we all should be in the office," or "We all should be remote," that's where I would say that is so hype. Because there's never a one size fits all at all, never. And particularly in this topic, it's where people can work best. So some companies maybe don't have great digital workplaces, so they do need to be more in person. Some people have tools. It depends on which company you're working in. I think the best thing is to offer flexibility. So the company needs to offer flexibility to employees and not say, "You have to be in the office on Monday." On the other hand, they should also make clear that sometimes if you're working on a project, maybe it is better if people are all together in a room. But employees particularly shouldn't feel like they're being forced to do something. There should be a flexibility around that. And I think in general, the workspace or future of work is flexibility, but that makes sense for each company and everybody's different.
Another trend, maybe there's another way to ask the question, of all of the trends and micro trends this year, what do you think was the most hype-ish? And I've got a background conversation about one of them. I want to see whether you and I land on the same place or not. I'm just kind of curious about how that would work. What is the most hypey business culture topic that's come out this year?
So not communications, just more in general.
Communication, wherever in the business world it shows up.
I think one is definitely the TikTok thing. We're all on TikTok. I think the other, and I know we've had some conversations about this, the whole mindfulness topic, which I guess from my Fight the Hype perspective, mindfulness or we'll give you massages at work or whatever. It's basically not changing things. It's making the company or culture sound better than it probably is, and it's offering support or topics, and particularly when I hear mindfulness or things like that, or even worse, there's the chief happiness officer or something, which I know a couple.
One of my best friends is a chief happiness officer, by the way, although he's the chief happiness officer of the entire country here in Iceland, not just of a company.
I think for a country, it's a bit different than a company, but often, I mean, not every company, but my first thought, and I would say that's from my Fight the Hype perspective, is that they probably have either very workaholic culture or almost burnout culture. And it's sort of the way of saying, oh, we're going to help you. But those positions in a company are very difficult to actually affect change. And offering things, I mean, and I say this from my personal perspective, where I've seen companies that I know or have worked in where there are these roles. You kind of know what the reality is. And I guess as a communicator, maybe we are often quite cynical because we know the truth often of things, which other people don't know. But does that really help the company? I mean, is it actually helping the culture be more supportive or more human? Or is it just sort of something that the company can say, oh, we're dealing with mindfulness?
No, that's interesting that you've laid it on mindfulness and really the world of corporate hygiene and well-being perks as being one of these. I would have picked quiet quitting as the hype trend of 2022, the substanceless hype trend of the year. To what extent does that resonate with you at all?
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, quiet. I mean, that's the hype, the fight the hype thing too. When if I read another phrase that starts with great or quiet, my stomach is churning a bit. Quiet quitting, quiet resignation, all these trends. But every time there's these trends, so many people jump on them. But the question is it really happening? Does it really make sense? I mean, I don't know how many times I've had conversations on LinkedIn where I'm one of the only people to actually counter something. And I know one person, some communications leader, and I wouldn't say his name, but I can't remember it anyway, wrote a blog about some authenticity. I can't remember. And one person who I also know on LinkedIn wrote, it wasn't even a critical comment. It was said, which is my also question, how is that going to work? And he was attacked. I mean, literally, really, like very verbally attacked. You're obviously a dinosaur. I mean, I don't even know. There was no conversation, and everybody else was like, oh my God, this blog is so amazing. And I mean,
You highlight a very interesting and important issue in the world of communication leadership and communication thought leadership. And that is, you've got people out there who are saying stuff, some of which is contrarian, some of which is, really just kind of, celebrating the trendiness of trends. But there's very little actual conversation going on. What do you think could actually stimulate some more conversation, some more productive conversation in the field in the coming year? Because it's certainly something that I'd like to see happen, because, I write, as I write quite a bit, and, often I get like 50 likes and no comments. What could stimulate some conversation out there? Because we need conversation to move things forward.
Often today, it's a big challenge, because I've had a couple of posts on LinkedIn that went viral. I think one had even 300,000 views or so. I can't remember the topic. But it was, I wouldn't say I wrote more from a hypey perspective, but it was commenting on something, or often it's just the title of a blog that is really, I would say perhaps could be construed as clickbait. but obviously if I did a title like that, then there's actual content behind it. So it's not so much clickbait, just grabbing people's attention. But I really, particularly in the communications world, it's almost self-perpetuating hype, because in many business areas, from my also perspective, there's not as much hype in communications. As always, we all need a newsroom, which was a few years ago. We all need to be on TikTok. And it's just a lot of people patting each other on the back. I think we need more people like us, the two of us, to really take these topics and not just agree with the hype. And I think one value which you have as a communicator, and unfortunately also not that many, and I would recommend everybody who's in communications or looking at or starting in communications, the communicator in many companies or the communications leader is often the only person in the company who tells the truth to the CEO or senior executives. And you get so much more value and respect when you do that, instead of just jumping on the latest trend or being another yes person, because they don't often get the truth. In my experience, it's often the communications person, or I would say myself too, to bring up these topics. And I think it's the same thing for communications, say writing a blog or a topic. You get so much more respect, but also just conversation and learning. If you don't write from the perspective that everybody else is, but you actually think about a topic, what actually makes sense. Back to the TikTok, or everybody's hybrid or whatever. What makes sense? Or even worse, which people often ignore, how would that actually work? I mean, I guess maybe I'm too logical, but often when people come up with these things, or we all have to do this or that, or things like in the US with so many memes, companies jump on the latest meme. I don't know, defund police, or cancel capitalism. I mean, how would that actually work? It sounds great. Worse is, of course, companies that just every month have their latest meme that they jump on, but they're actually not changing anything. So actually questioning things, not just immediately jumping on. We definitely need more people like that. And so, and for the communications role itself, or the communications leader, that within a company really gets you respect. And you learn so much by doing that.
You talk about the meme of the month, and I can't resist the temptation to talk about what I would consider, in the same vein, the meme of the century. And that is the concept of employee engagement, particularly, the idea that A, internal comms and employee engagement are the same thing, and B, that focusing on the improvement of employee engagement scores is somehow going to magically improve your profitability and your productivity. To what extent do you see the employee engagement conversation as being genuinely value additive versus, just simply being, this meme on steroids?
I think, there's so many articles or gurus talking about how to improve employee motivation or productivity. I mean, basically, if you treat people like they're humans and not task robots or slaves, that's already mostly what you need to do for that. Employee engagement, I think is a piece that you need to look at in terms of, employee communications, for example, isn't, as it used to be, just top down, the latest message from the CEO. It's about explaining topics. It's about bringing people together so that they know what's going on. So they're also motivated and also productive and like the job and like working there. Employee engagement that's gone awry is when there are employee surveys, which most companies do, and either people are forced to more or less only say everything's great, or which unfortunately I've also seen in some companies, the results aren't so great, but the good pieces are played up and the bad things are ignored, and employees are immediately cynical. And I think that's one thing you always have to watch with employee communications. You don't want people to be cynical. So if there is an employee engagement survey, for example, or the company really wants to improve employee engagement, then things actually have to improve, because employees will very quickly be cynical, and not believe anything the either employee engagement team is saying or the leaders are saying. I think employee engagement as a topic should be more in the HR space, or it's a strong working collaboration between internal comms and HR. But also, you need, for, I would say, every topic, if the CEO is not behind it or doesn't support it, then you might as well not even do it, because sending the communicator out or the HR person out to try to promote something when everybody knows the CEO either doesn't talk about it, or worse, says things against it, then that's never going to work.
Well, I think you highlight an interesting trend here. I think an implicit trend around employee engagement, that a lot of what's done in the name of employee engagement is actually an attempted workaround around the concept of actually treating people like human beings instead of as task robots and worse. And that, you also, in saying that, there's something inherent about the design of a lot of mainstream employee engagement surveys, in that they either drive forced positive answers. Like if you ask the Gallup Q12 question of, do you think your associates, your fellow employees do quality work? If you've got any doubt about the confidentiality of that survey, you're not going to answer that question in the negative. But you also said that you also implied that, a lot of companies, or at least a number of companies, use these forced positive results as a bulwark against actual change. Is that something you want to elaborate on? Because I think that's a really, interesting cautionary trend that I think people need to be more aware of, particularly more IC people need to be aware of.
Yeah, I mean, in general, results of employee engagement surveys or feedback from employees is important, but obviously a company cannot change everything overnight. But if you're getting results from an employee engagement survey, which certain perspectives, for example, do you recommend our company as an employer to friends and family, which isn't very good. I mean, that should be setting off alarms for the leaders, that there is something that actually needs to happen, rather than, oh, why are those people so upset? So if you're going to do, from the internal comms perspective, if you're supporting communications around an employee survey, which tend to be run by HR, you should be also pushing that whatever results are, good or bad, are openly communicated. And the bad things, or the answers that are quite negative, at least the senior leaders admit that something needs to be done, but also that obviously things can't change overnight. And I think one thing that can be a very huge hindrance is when the company communicates a very strong supportive corporate culture with values, et cetera, both internally and externally, and employees don't see that necessarily being lived. And for example, toxic leaders are promoted. When you get these results, I mean, if nothing changes, or if you see the background of what's going on, and the results come, and these senior leaders don't see the need to change, then nothing's going to change. And of course, it can't change overnight. But I think internal comms, this is one thing which is so important. That again, back to this fight the hype or speaking truth, really saying, the company will be successful if the employees are informed, interested, motivated, and they should actually be informed, interested, and motivated, and not, we had these 3 answers which were great from the employee engagement survey, but the rest obviously they're not, because it is a very good, if it's, guarantee anonymous answers, et cetera. It's a great snapshot, at least from employees, because normally probably they would never give you feedback.
Let me just jump in, because we've got a limited amount of time left. The idea that corporate behavior can be inconsistent with corporate rhetoric, and I think that's an outstanding segue for a very brief mention of one of your other pursuits, which is fiction writing. To what extent does your fiction writing interplay with or provide relief from your corporate comms work? And, do you have anything to recommend, from your repertoire for this audience?
I love language and writing. So I think this fits quite well to also what I do, communications. Being able to craft messages or explain complex topics, as you said at the beginning of this discussion, many of the companies I've worked in are more technical or scientific, explaining complex topics simply. I've always loved writing. And I think to be a good communicator, you need to be creative, not just with language. And it definitely helps to, when I'm writing fiction, I'm currently working on a cozy crime murder mystery series. First book will come out in about a year. It just gives you really creative use of language, which you can also use in terms of creativity particularly for internal comms, because people won't want to read or hear sort of dry, sort of businessy videos or texts. And you have to tell, this is a bit of a hype topic, storytelling, but you do have to have sort of an interesting article or text or video that really pull people in. And this is something that I can definitely gain experience from in my fiction writing.
Well, we're coming up to the end of our hour together. I just wanted to ask if you had anything else that we haven't covered in this conversation that you think could add value to the Icon podcast audience here.
I think at the end, as I said before, internal comms is so important. Many people want to do PR or say speech writing. I think it's such an important topic. And if you're interested in communications or you're already in communications, I think having additional experience as an internal comms person or specializing it is so valuable for every company. And we need more people who are really focused and experienced in internal comms. Because we see now today with all of the challenges around remote work, hybrid, or the crises that are going on, we need people within companies bringing the employees together, and also more importantly, making sure the leaders aren't off somewhere 50,000 feet up, but really connected to employees.
That's excellent. Really want to thank you for the conversation today, for the insights and wisdom that you've shared, and also for putting some, pretty sharp definition behind the Fight the Hype slogan. So thank you very much, Erik, for joining us. This is Mike Klein, and signing off from Reykjavik and the Icon podcast for Sparrow Connected.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Icon podcast. This podcast has been brought to you by Sparrow Connected. Head over to sparrowconnected.com to learn more about the internal comms platform that is elevating the internal comms profession, and be sure to follow We Lead Comms on LinkedIn. If you liked this podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast channels and tune in for the next episode.